We had a great run for 10 years. The last decade, we've got the best record in the Eastern Conference. We've put together a group that we thought was highly competitive and probably had a chance to get to a championship level. The injuries obviously derailed us quite a bit, especially the last few years. And then last year, there were just so many of them. But we've got to put this back together now, going younger, more athletic, and building it back up, moving into the future.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. And today's Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast is also brought to you by SeatGeek. Download the mobile app for the easiest way to buy tickets and use the promo code LOFANTASY to get yourself a $20 rebate off your first purchase. My name is Josh Lloyd, and as always, you can find me on Twitter at redrock_bball, on Instagram at redrock_bball, and Facebook at facebook.com/redrockbasketball. We are here just a little bit before Game 2 tips off to look at the Chicago Bulls for their season in review show. So,
let's get to it.
I reckon I might have a bit to say about the Bulls. We'll see how it goes. There's going to be. I'll try and limit the ranting levels of a Bulls fan over some of the idiocy that plagued this team throughout the season, and try and keep it as neutral as possible. But I reckon it might be a little bit hard. Let's talk Chicago Bulls. They were a team, obviously, that finished the season 41-41. A lot of people thought that their additions in the off season would land them a top 5 seed, a top 4 seed. I was never that confident. They snuck into the playoffs in that 8 seed. They underperformed their expected win-loss total by just the one win, so pretty much right on where they needed to be. Obviously, they took those first 2 games against the Celtics in the playoffs, and lots of people incorrectly were thinking that if Rajon Rondo happened to be healthy for the rest of the series, that they would have beaten the Celtics and maybe pushed forward and beaten the Wizards and challenged the Cavs, and none of that would have happened. They had a couple of good first games. I don't think that it would have stuck from there on, but got to the playoffs, and they that's just who they are now. Just a mediocre team with real struggles to be able to get better than that next season. And the younger and more athletic bullshit that Gar Forman threw out in the preseason press conference or off-season press conference was a load of shit, as we saw by the moves that this team made throughout the season. Let's have a look at their upcoming draft picks in this NBA draft. Pick 16 and pick 38, they're not going to be able to do a huge amount there. They'll be looking for whatever NBA-ready senior they can find with pick 16, I'm sure. One that's preferably got a history of injuries and has limited athletic ability would be exactly what the Bulls front office likes to go for. Could they take a punt on someone? The odds of that are pretty minimal. I would like them to take an upside player for once. That would be interesting. They have needs in many different positions. Point guard. So you got the wing covered there with Butler, but another guard, because Dwayne Wade's not going to be around forever, nor he's going to be good. Be a big men stock that could take a hit this offseason as well. So they've got needs all over the place. So numerous players. Justin Jackson might be someone that falls there. You could totally see the Bulls taking someone like Luke Kennard if he happens to fall to that range. That's a very ballsy type pick. There are numerous ways that they can go. I wouldn't mind it if say OG Anunoby falls down. That would be an okay pick for the Bulls. I haven't fully dug into who I want them to take. Obviously, at 16, there's a few decisions that need to be made ahead of them before we get to that spot. But I think we'll be able to find, hopefully, if there was a competent management team in place, you'll be able to find a decent player there. But do not have confidence in Foreman and Paxson, as you're well aware, I'm sure. The Bulls free agent situation, Dwayne Wade has a $24 million player option. All indications are that he'll be taking that player option because he's not going to get a $24 million deal somewhere else. Now, maybe he could find himself, get a 3-year, $60 million deal. I'd be even doubtful of that, so I think that he'll be back. And Rajon Rondo has a $13.4 million non-guaranteed deal. $3 million of that is guaranteed, and all indications from the Bulls, again, my eyes could not roll any harder, all indications from the Bulls are that they will bring Rondo back and guarantee his contract. Let's go back. Let's just roll it back for one more season of infighting, of poor lineups, poor roster construction, and potential grasp at the 8th seed. Let's bring it all back for one more year, because you know what? We've got to have that mediocrity. That is just what Chicago Bulls basketball stands for. They got a couple of interesting decisions in restricted free agency, quite a few, in fact. Michael Carter-Williams is a restricted free agent. Joffrey Laverne is a restricted free agent. Cristiano Felicio is a restricted free agent. And of course, my boy Nikola Mirotic is a restricted free agent as well. I would be stunned if Carter-Williams and Laverne return. They didn't do a huge amount of their time in Chicago. Felicio, it's going to depend on what sort of offers he gets. I think he's going to get some offers that will surprise people. I think he's a really interesting player, and they should be doing everything they can to bring him back. Same with Mirotic, but I'm not sure that they necessarily will. For Mirotic's fantasy value, it's probably better off if he goes somewhere else, because he won't have to deal with the ludicrous lineup decisions, coaching foibles of Fred Hoiberg that we see so often affect his game and affect this Bulls team in general. So if you own Mirotic in a dynasty league, you should be hoping that he goes somewhere else. If he goes to Brooklyn, if he goes to... Imagine how good it would be if you could pair him with Porzingis in the front court for the Knicks. I know that's not going to happen, but anywhere he could go where he doesn't have to deal with the dickery of Fred Hoiberg would be a benefit to Mirotic. So that is a situation for everybody to watch, and I'm not convinced that the Bulls bring him back. Unrestricted free agent Anthony Morrow, he barely played, except for when Hoiberg decided in the most important games of the season we'll start giving him minutes. And the same thing for Isaiah Cannon, who has a $1.6 million non-guaranteed deal for next year. Didn't play at all in the second half of the season until we got to the playoffs, and then we got to that stage. You know what, Isaiah, you probably should start from now on, because we haven't played you at all, and you offer no future for us, and you're not actually good. But let's start games and in the playoffs, and let's just roll with it when we've got 3 other point guards who probably could be doing that job at a higher rate. But such is the genius of Mr. Ames himself, Fred Hoiberg. This team had the 20th best offensive rating and the 6th best defensive rating. A lot of that stuff was quite predictable. The defense, obviously, with Lopez, Felicio to a lower extent, and Butler contribute that defensive offensive rating. Actually, they didn't do too bad to get to a ranking of 20th. I thought they'd really struggle, but I guess the details of it is what really condemns this team. They were 28th in three-point attempt rate, and that was the criticism that I had, along with everyone else, of this team heading into the offseason. Who the hell is going to shoot threes? And the answer is nobody. They were dead last in effective field goal percentage, so not only were they not taking the threes, but the shots that they were taking, they weren't hitting them. So not only were they taking low-value shots in two-pointers and long twos and mid-range shots, then they weren't actually hitting those shots at a high rate to put that field goal percentage up. They were 28th in the league in three-pointers made, 29th in three-point attempts, and 24th in three-point percentage. So they didn't take them, they didn't hit them, and they converted at a shit rate. They had the 3rd most two-point attempts in the NBA, but they were 29th in two-point percentage. That says all you need to know about the coach and the roster of this team. They were 2nd in offensive rebounding and 3rd in total rebounds, and that obviously was something that did contribute to them having not the worst offense in the league, being able to get those second chance points from guys like Lopez, who was quite an important piece for this team. They also gave up the 2nd fewest free throw attempts in the NBA, so that's another reason that defense was able to maintain such a high ranking throughout the season. Offensive ratings on the team, the highest offensive rating, Anthony Morrow, Felicio, Butler, and Jaren Grant. So a couple of, or 3 bench guys there. Morrow, obviously, in very limited minutes. The best defensive rating, I don't think many people will be surprised to see Michael Carter-Williams there, because that is something that we can all agree that he is good at. Rondo was 2nd, Mirotic was 3rd, a couple of names that I was a little bit surprised to see there. I always say that Mirotic's defense is really underrated, but I also say that Rondo's is overrated, so they both appeared in that list, while Wade and Butler rounded out the top 5 in best defensive ratings. They had 7 guys that shot 40% on corner threes, which is higher than a number of teams. The problem is they just didn't take enough of them. Butler, Wade, Mirotic, Grant, Denzel Valentine, Morrow, and Rondo, yes, Rondo, all shot over 40% on corner threes. They just needed to take more of them. That was the problem. And they didn't hit their threes in really anywhere else on the court, as at 24th overall in three-point percentage. But they got those corner threes going. That is the staple of a modern offense, and Fred Hoiberg, not happening. Mirotic converted at 64% at the rim. So he's a guy that, and this is, again, something that gets lost in Mirotic's game, is he's not just a standalone bomb away from the corner three-point shooter. He's a guy that can take guys off the dribble. He can attack. He can get to the rim. And we saw that 64% at the rim's a decent number for a guy who's predominantly thought of as being just a three-point bomber. Rondo, on the other hand, 49.7 at the rim. Horrendous. And that's part of what makes him a bad player, his inability to shoot from distance, from mid-range, and at the rim. It's almost Ricky Rubio. I think it's worse than Ricky Rubio's numbers. Cameron Payne wasn't much better, just 38% at the rim. But weirdly, between 3 to 16 feet, Payne shot over 50% in his time at the Bulls, which is a number that is highly irregular and probably not going to be able to be sustainable. 38 at the rim, 32 at 3. All other ranges, over 50%. If you can work that out, then you're doing better than I am. Let's have a look at the PER leaders, or the advanced stats leaders for this Bulls team. Jim Butler at 25.1 led the team in PER. True shooting went to Morrow at 61%, which is a huge number for a guard. He is, if nothing else, an excellent shooter. He is horrible at everything else, but he is an excellent shooter. Usage rate, Dwayne Wade led the team at 29%. That is abominable to have Wade have a usage of 3% higher than Butler. 29.6 for Wado and 26.5 for Jim. That is horrendous that Wade would take that many shots or that much, use that many possessions when he's just not as effective as he once was. Unsurprisingly, Butler led the team in win shares per 48, offensive box score plus minus, box score plus minus, and VORP, while Michael Carter-Williams led the team in defensive box score plus minus. Because as I said, you talk about Morrow being this great shooter and does nothing else. Well, Michael Carter-Williams is the guy that can provide the defense and struggle at pretty much every other aspect of the game. Let's have a look at their lineups. They had 3 lineups over 100 minutes, and the most used lineup played 390 minutes. So that's a good chunk of time for their best or their most used lineup. And in fact, that lineup was effective. It was Butler, Gibson, Lopez, Rondo, and Wade, and that was a plus 1.8. So that's their starting lineup. So that's not a bad number. The problem is that their best lineup that used over 100 minutes out of those 3 lineups, so they're one of their 3 most used lineups, Butler, Lopez, Mirotic, Rondo, and Zipser, was a plus 22.1. And that's what happens when you put some three-point shooting in there. A guy that can stretch the floor in Mirotic, a guy that can stretch the floor in Zipser, and provide something that's not the stodginess of Gibson and Wade. And while I love Taj Gibson, that combination of him and Lopez, along with Rondo, Butler, and Wade, was never a great idea for the modern NBA. And even though it was a positive, the other 2 biggest or most used lineups were way more effective. Their most used 4-man, no surprise, was Gibson, Butler, Lopez, and Wade, and that was a plus 3.3. But their most used lineup that didn't include Gibson, obviously he's not with the team, was Butler, Lopez, Rondo, and Wade, and that was a 0.8. But their best 4-man, and you're going to see these names appear pretty commonly, their best 4-man, Butler, Rondo, Zipser, and Mirotic, was a plus 23.6. That Butler and Mirotic combination, there's something there. The most used 3-man, Butler, Lopez, and Rondo, plus 0.6. The best 3-man, Butler, Mirotic, and Rondo, plus 13.4. The most used 2-man, Butler and Lopez, 1.6. The best 2-man, Butler and Mirotic, 12.7. It's almost like putting a guy that can shoot threes and space the floor with Butler works better. Who would have thought, apart from everybody who had any decency of common sense or any level of basketball knowledge, could have known that, playing nobody that can shoot alongside Jimmy Butler is not going to work. I don't care if Taj Gibson had a better preseason than Nikola Mirotic. It was worse for the team. You can go out there and stick ribbons on guys' asses and well done, Taj, you had a good preseason, you can start. The team's going to be shit, but you can start. That's bullshit coaching. It's bullshit, and I don't care that he had a better preseason. I don't care that they went 1-on-1 and he beat him out fair and square. It was worse for your team. It was blatantly clear it was worse for your team, and the numbers prove that out. Fred Hoiberg, that was bad, and that is just one of about 100 mistakes that he made during the season. He had a couple of good things, but that was just another one of those horrible things that happened during this season. And that's why I do have faith in Mirotic, is when he is used correctly. And yes, great players don't need to be used correctly. I'm not stating that he's not an all-star level player. He is a good player. And great players don't need to be used correctly. I guess in some degree they do, but they don't need that. They can overcome that. But to get the most out of Mirotic, to get the best result for your team, use it properly. Do it properly. Use him in the right spot. And we did start to see that again in March when we saw Gibson go and Mirotic move into that starting lineup. He was rolling and the Bulls were starting to play better, to absolutely nobody's surprise. Maybe somebody's surprise that just doesn't doesn't buy into the Nikola Mirotic hype, I guess is the way that I'll say that. Now is as good a time as any, though, for me to tell you about SeatGeek. You're not going to be able to go watch Bulls games at the moment using SeatGeek, but you are going to be able to go to any other sports or concert events that you want to see. Buying those tickets has often been a confusing process. It's been hard to find that best deal for the game or show that you want to go to, and none of those older ticket sites want to change that. But SeatGeek is different. They've come along and created an amazing app and website that makes it easier than ever for fans to buy and sell tickets. It is the place that I go to look for tickets. I was on there just the other day trying to see if I could find myself if there was going to be a WWE Raw or SmackDown event when I was over in the States in any of the cities that I was in. Unfortunately not. The closest I could see that I think Monday Night Raw was in Phoenix when I was in Utah. That's a decent journey away, so I don't think I'll be getting that one. But I did get my baseball tickets off SeatGeek for a couple of games that I'm going to see. SeatGeek does all the price comparison for you, searching multiple ticket sites and ensuring you get the best possible deal. SeatGeek does all the work and saves you time and money. And SeatGeek wants to help you get the most bang for your buck. And that's why every ticket is given a grade based on value. You'll see immediately any underpriced seats and able to find the best deals that fit your budget. And best of all, my listeners get a $20 rebate off their first SeatGeek purchase. To get your $20 rebate, download the SeatGeek app, go to the settings tab and click add a promo code and enter that promo code LOFANTASY, and SeatGeek will send you $20 after you've made your first ticket purchase. Download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code LOFANTASY today. I'm going to have a quick drink because I'm getting a little bit fired up talking about the Bulls. Let's get into this team now and talk about these guys. Jim Butler will start with, of course, he is the stud on this team. He played 76 games, which for Butler is a win. Considering the previous 3 seasons, he'd yet to get to 70 games, yet that's never talked about like Anthony Davis was, but it was a breakthrough for Butler this year to get over that 70-game mark. And I was even more concerned with Butler's games played than Davis's, because some of Davis's was due to end-of-season shutdown. Yeah, the season, no, he's got an injury, let's get him in for surgery early, whereas Butler's was like legitimate injuries that he was trying to always fight back from and get back because the team was pushing for that playoff spot. So the fact that he couldn't get to 70 games in that, it's do-or-die type environment was more indicative of an issue, but he played through it this year, 76 games, 37 minutes a game, and was great. He deserved his spot on the All-NBA team, 24 points, 1.2 triples, 6 boards, 5.5 assists, 2 steals, and half a block. 45 from the field, 87 from the line, and 37 from 3 for a true shooting of 59. Really hard to fault too much about Butler. For the year, he comfortably led the team in on-off at 11.1. His head-to-head rank, he was 15th for the season, 15th pre, 16th post. Really strong numbers from Butler, and he's just going to be that guy who's a mid-second round guy, I would say, for the next couple of seasons. Always the debate is will he remain in Chicago and what would happen to his numbers there. I don't see the Bulls trading him this offseason. Maybe it happens. I really don't see them making that move, so I wouldn't be too concerned. But if he was going to a team like the Celtics, then yes, he would suffer a little bit with his shot attempts, with his scoring, with his usage. That sort of stuff would dip with playing alongside a guy like Isaiah Thomas. So that would drop. But I don't think that his defense wouldn't drop. He'd still get those steal numbers. His rebounding would be fine, and I think his assist would be alright. But the fact that he was able to get to 5.5 assists this year was really key in him maintaining that high of a level of a ranking, and I was a little bit concerned him coming across and sharing with Rondo that he wouldn't be able to get those assists. And the year before he had 4.8, but he was actually able to increase that, and the team just always seemed to look so much better when he was handling things rather than Rondo or Grant or Carter Williams or Cannon or Payne or whoever else was running that point guard spot. When Butler had the ball in his hands, it made more sense, and they should be looking to run him as a point guard way more often than they do, rather than that Rondo, Wade, Butler 3 alphas backcourt lineup, which led to some certain struggles for them during the season. But Butler was fantastic. I would imagine that he just continues on at age of 27. He's smack bang in the middle of his prime. Another couple of years at this sort of level of production, I think is a fair enough assumption. And then we'll start to see that slide with maybe a little bit of an efficiency drop and some of that playmaking and defense. And I think the steals would probably be the first to go. And if that falls down to under 1.5 a game, then he falls himself outside the top 20. And that's what I think will be the first thing to drop off. And then some of the efficiency might also come with that as well with Butler, but he was obviously a fantastic player, and you were pretty happy if you did draft him in fantasy this year. I don't think there's much debate about that. Dwayne Wade came across from the Heat in what was honestly a shocking move in the free agency of last summer. And I say shocking using multiple definitions of that word. Shocking as in I was shocked that it happened, and shocking in that it was just a terrible move for the Bulls to make. I understand the PR behind it that they think they're getting. Look at that, we landed Dwayne Wade, but the majority of people just go, you landed Dwayne Wade, like what are you doing? Like Dwayne Wade is not providing anything of benefit for this team. I understand the hometown connection and all that bullshit, or your thought process that Wade is bringing free agents into Chicago. I just don't see that happening. Like, what free agent's going, you know what, I really need to play with 36-year-old Dwayne Wade, who is going to be injured for half the year anyway, and play for a dysfunctional front office with a bad head coach. But you know what, Dwayne Wade's there, so I probably should go there. And he might not even be there this season. Like, who's thinking that? Which players are thinking that? Wade played 60 games, so he had a really impressive year the year before with staying healthy. He played 74 games, but down to just the 60 this season. 30 minutes a game, 18 points, 0.8 threes, 4.5 boards, 4 assists, 1.5 steals, and of course the always impressive block numbers from him at 0.7, 43 from the field and 79 from the line, and as usual a putrid 3-point percentage of 31 and true shooting of 51%. He saw his efficiency drop from 52 true shooting to 51 this year. His field goal percentage dropped from 46 to 43. And he saw his assist rate drop as well, playing with Butler and with Rondo. He went from 4.6. And he'd been over 4.5 assists for the last 3 years. He went down to 3.8. But one thing he did improve, and we saw it at the start of the year, is his ability to hit threes. He hit 0.8 threes per game this year. Last year he was at 0.1, and the year before he was at 0.5. He's never going to be a big three-point shooter, but the fact that he did start to take them was an improvement, and the fact that he hadn't hit over 30% of his threes for the previous 3 seasons, and he got to over 30% this year, is an improvement there in itself, but it's never going to be something that you bank on for his fantasy value. And in terms of managing Wade with injuries, that 60 games and 30 minutes a game he played, I would expect a similar sort of thing next season. Maybe the 60 games, maybe it goes to 63. But the 30 minutes, I wouldn't be shocked to see that down to 29 or 28 from Wade. And that's going to push him right down. Now, he was the 61st ranked player for this season, but post All-Star, he was 146. Now, some of that is him returning from that elbow injury, but about half of his games that he played after the All-Star break were before that injury. In that time, he played 28 minutes, 15 points, 4.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists with a steal and half a block, and his usual inefficient shooting. And even though it's only a 12-game sample, I reckon that sort of stat line is going to be more indicative of what we see from Wade over the next couple of seasons, and that pushed him way outside the top 100. In fact, 146th he was after the All-Star break. So that's obviously not great numbers, and I think if you're looking to take Dwayne Wade inside the top 100 next season, I reckon you're going to be pretty disappointed. There's no upside in that play, and there's all downside with him if he takes a drop-off in minutes, in management, in rest, and in actual ability, which is a possibility at the age that Dwayne Wade is now, at 35, where he currently is. So, and we don't know where he's going to go. So that's how I think you should be viewing Wade as we move forward for him in his career. Had been a fantastic career, obviously a great player, but it is starting to wind down, and those numbers, I wouldn't be shocked to see Wade over the course of the entirety of next season be outside the top 100. My mate, Rajon Rondo, played 69 games.
Giggity.
Played 27 minutes a game, 8 points, 0.7 threes, 5 boards, 6.7 assists, and 1.5 steals. 41 from the field, 60 from the line, 38 from 3 for a true shooting of a disgusting 46%. But the season from him was, I guess, marred by controversy, not a surprise, benchings, out of the rotationings, thoughts of waving and stretching, coming back and starting, just weird shit all over the place from Rondo. Started the season to begin with, and then was moved not only from being the starter, but to being completely out of the rotation. He ended up starting 42 of the 69 games that he played, so started for a majority of them, but the coaching decisions of Hoiberg throughout the season were curious. I think it happened 5 times this season that a starting point guard for the Bulls had been a DNP CD the game before. and a starter had gone from being a starter to being a DMP CD. So not only did they not get demoted to being the backup, it was like, you're good enough to start for us next game. You know what? You don't play at all. And that's what happened to Rondo. Then there was the fracturing in the relationship between he and Butler and Wade, with Butler and Wade calling him out and Rondo siding with all the younger players, which is great. And I don't really have any issue with some of the stuff that Rondo did. I've got no issue with him mentoring the young people. I think he did a great job of working with those guys and developing trust with those players. I've got no problem with him calling out Dwayne Wade or Jimmy Butler for some of the bullshit that they went on about, which was really petty, and that's part of the reason why I don't love Butler. I think he's just not a great teammate. That's based on numerous things, but I'm not as into him as a player. He's very similar to me in that sort of a sense with Paul George. I just don't really think that they're just great overall stars because of that intangible thing that I do think goes against him. And I had no problem with Rondo calling some of that out. But wherever he goes, he courts controversy. It just happens. And his play on the court was bad. Especially the reason he got benched is because he was bad. It wasn't a politics thing. It wasn't because he was punching on with these guys. He was bad. That is why he got benched. Now, he probably shouldn't have been taken completely out of the rotation, but I understood why he was. But he was just very, very bad. He gave no effort on defense. He assist hunts like crazy. We know that. He passes up open shots. He can't hit the shots anyway, but he'll be on a fast break heading into a layup, and he'll pass it behind to someone else instead of hitting that layup. He tries to pad his stats, and he gives no effort defensively. He also had that issue with the assistant coach where he had to get fined for throwing something at him. He just has this petulant streak, which is frustrating. Now, people will look back and they'll look at those first 2 games in the playoffs and they'll say, oh, Rondo's back. Playoff Rondo, he's back. He played 34 minutes a game in the playoffs, 11.5 points, 8.5 boards, 10 assists, 3.5 steals. He's locked in. It's all sorted now. He's going to be good. And I will say that's 2 games, but how about the last 4 years of him being shithouse? That's what I would look at, of him just not being good in that time. And you can say, yes, he averaged 11.5 points and 11.5 assists in Sacramento last season, but that does not mean he was good, because he was bad. He was very, very bad in Sacramento, and he was probably equally as bad in Chicago. In fact, I might even say he might have even been a little bit better in Chicago, despite his numbers being worse. Where does he go? It looks like the Bulls are bringing him back, and they'll probably foolishly go back to that 3 alphas starting backcourt where nobody can shoot threes. Even though Butler did hit him at 37%, he's still not a great 3-point shooter. So we'll see Rondo back there. He'll still provide those assists. He'll still be a guy that can get steals. He averaged 1.5 steals this year in 27 minutes. There's no reason he couldn't get 1.8 steals or even 2 steals a game next season if he actually tried. But we have got a 2-game sample size of him trying on defense and about a 4-year sample size of him not trying. I'll lean the 4 games, the 4 years, even though those 2 games were the most recent thing we saw from him. I will still believe that he is shit at defense. Although, maybe shit at defense is not the right way of saying it, because he can put in defensive effort, but most of the time he doesn't and doesn't try on that end, and that's what does cause some problems. His advanced numbers were below average win shares, below average true shooting, obviously below average PER, BPM right on the nose at 0.3, so sort of just an average player in that metric. The defensive stuff looked okay. 1.6 defensive box score plus minus for Rondo is a real win for him. But again, it's his effort levels that do lead to problems with him and this team. I think you're going to have him back playing around 29 minutes a game. I don't see Hoiberg making any sensible decisions to keep him as a backup or anything like that. They'll run it back. They'll do what they did in the playoffs, and they'll think it's going to work, and it won't work. And Rondo will provide those assists, he'll provide those steals, and he'll be a late-round fantasy player. You need to deal with percentages, well, good luck. Then you're not going to be dealing with him. He's a sub 60% free throw guy, a 41% field goal guy. He's not going to score. He'll get you above average rebounds, steals, and assists, and that's what you get. And if that's what fits your team, that's fine. As long as you can deal with those negatives, he is a late-round pick. He won't be sniffing the top 50, in my opinion. He'll be just that guy that is who he is. But in saying that, post All-Star, he was the 47th ranked player. He played an extra minute a game, 28 minutes a game, got 11 points, 5 boards, 7 assists, and almost 2 steals, and shot 47%. So it does give you a little bit of hope, but I'm not putting my faith in Rondo being that top 50 guy. But I do think that he can have a top 100 season, but there is still so much uncertainty with what Højbjerg is going to do because we know that this lineup is just not going to work. Kevin says, if Rondo had stayed healthy, you think the Bulls would have finished the Celtics off? Absolutely not. I do not think that would have been the case. Nikola Mirotic, 70 games, 24 minutes a game. He finished the season as the 117th ranked player, so still in those limited minutes, he was a useful player. 171st pre-All-Star, 72nd post-All-Star. Pretty much has been the descriptor for his career. Let's have a strong second half of the year, but it also ties into like his first season in that post-March or post-February era is when Thibodeau had injuries to Noah and Gibson, and he had to give minutes to Mirotic, and he fired up. In his second season his first season under Højbjerg, and his second season in the NBA, Højbjerg misused him consistently for the first 4 months of the season. Got to after the All-Star break, and he actually showed confidence in him and kept him out there minutes, and the numbers came. And exactly the same thing happened this season in that they were able to, with Gibson gone, they played Mirotic more minutes, and it panned out. And this is what I mean by not using him properly, playing him in bad lineups, jerking him around in terms of playing time. Yeah, really, for a guy that does have confidence issues, he misses one shot, then he gets benched for a quarter and a half. That is the problem with the coaching. Now, he was the second highest on this team in on-off at +8. That's a really big number, and he was able to put up some really impressive numbers in that post-All-Star break period. 27 minutes a game, 14 and 6, 2.7 triples, 0.8 steals, 0.8 blocks, 47, 78, and 41. The 3-point percentage is what really gets people. For the year, he was just a 34% shooter, meaning the pre-All-Star, his 3-point shooting was horrible. We're talking about 32% numbers for him pre-All-Star. But got it cracking. But again, some of that's to do with playing in the right situation and playing in the right role and not expecting him just to be a spot-up shooter that takes these difficult long-range threes. And some of his shot selection's horrible. Some of his pump faking is horrible. I readily admit that. But they could still draw way more out of Mirotic. And him playing just 24 minutes a game this year is a big reason why the Bulls were terrible for most of it. That post-All-Star is more indicative of what he can do. He can be a 1-1 player pretty comfortably. He does more than just shoot threes. He rebounds well. He gets steals. He gets blocks. He can score. And he can be efficient as well. So it is all going to come down to where he plays next year. People are always going to be frustrated with Mirotic, but I think sometimes the frustration narrative obscures what he actually does, and I'd be more than happy taking a pick of him in the last couple of rounds and expecting him, again, in only 24 minutes, he was a top 120 player, and I think that he can become a guy that has another top 100 season next year if he falls into a situation where he can play decent enough minutes. He's not perfect. There are things that need to change from him. He's not a bad defender, as people will have you make out. He is not bad. He's not great, but he is not bad. He is average, probably above average in his defensive work. I think he's an above average player in general, and it is going to depend a lot. But if he goes back to Chicago with Gibson gone, do they go with Bobby Portis, who remains bad? Or do they keep Mirotic starting there and unlocking that Mirotic-Butler combination, which has been so successful for this team? That is what they should be doing, but I have absolutely zero faith to expect Højbjerg to do what is best for him and what is best for this team. Again, no problem considering him a top 100 guy for the next couple of seasons. After that, it probably drops off pretty quickly, but for the next couple of seasons at least. Robin Lopez. Another player that was curiously managed by Fred Højbjerg this season. He ended up playing 81 games, and that's something that's always been a strength of Lopez, is his ability to stay healthy. 81 games, 28 minutes a game, 10.5 points, 6.5 boards, 1.5 blocks, 49 and 72. But he was used in a curious way because early on, he was playing limited minutes. He was playing 24 minutes, 23 minutes, playing 18 minutes, 27, all over the place. He was also being used in these weird offensive zones where you would have sections of the game where it would just be, let's just give it to Lopez and let him shoot. And that's why we've got such a low field goal percentage of just 49% for Robin Lopez. That is not what you expect from a guy that, from these last 4 seasons, 55, 54, 54, and then he goes under 50 this year because they were using him offensively in such a weird role, like just making him a focal point. When you've got Butler, when you've got Wade to do that, when you've got Mirotic to do that, and getting those shots up to Lopez was just thoroughly confusing. Like, he had games with 17 shot attempts, 15 shot attempts. He had a stretch in January of 5 straight games of over 10 shot attempts. He had a stretch at the start of the season in November, 20 shot attempts, 16, 15, 16. Like, that is nonsensical. He started the season 27 minutes, 19 minutes, 19 minutes, 14 minutes. Really weird stuff. Now, I like Lopez, what he does for this team. As for his fantasy value, it really comes from normally what he'd been able to do is provide solid percentages, field goal and free throw. That field goal dropped with the curious usage. He's not a high shot blocker. He's not a high rebounder. He's not a high scorer. He finished the season as the 127th ranked player this year in Roto, 108th in head-to-head, and was about the same pre- and post-All-Star. I think that's who he is. He's a low upside big that you can take in those last couple of picks. Even if they bring back Chris Felicio, I don't think that he is replacing Robin Lopez as the starting center. And you should be looking at a 27 to 28 minute role from Lopez again next year. 10 and 7, 1.5 blocks, with hopefully back over 50% and 80% free throws. The team was 1.8 points per 100 possessions better off with him on the court, so he was a positive player for this team, and what he does is really key. But again, poor usage, and he's just not a good fantasy option, because he just, despite all those shot attempts that he got, which again was just stupidly weird and really, really bad coaching, he wasn't able to convert those and took away a lot of the advantages Lopez has in fantasy, and that's being an efficient player who helps you in those categories, which can be hard to find that combination of high field goal, high free throw, and it just doesn't do much in those other areas. Even if they bring back Felicio, I think Lopez will still start and play that 28 or 27 minute a night role. I don't think there's much challenging that. Michael Carter-Williams was horrible. He played 45 games, 19 minutes a game, 6.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 0.8 steals, and 0.5 blocks, but as usual, cannot shoot. 37% from the field, 75 from the line, and 23 from three for an absolutely disgusting true shooting of 44%. I said that Rondo's was bad. This is worse. Although when he was out there, I didn't hate seeing him on the court because he provided defense. And that was why Rondo got benched in the first place, because he did not give a single shit about defense. He did not care at all, Rondo. And that is why he got benched, along with some curious offensive stuff. But that's why he got benched. And Carter-Williams came in and did it defensively. But still, for a guy that does struggle offensively, he takes some dumb shots himself. He only had 7 shot attempts per game in his 19 minutes, but 7 in 19 minutes is probably way more than he should be having. He can't finish anywhere. He obviously can't shoot the outside shot. We know that. He's only 52% at the rim, which is not great. As we stretch out further, he's under 30% shooter. Like, he struggles in just so many different areas. But defensively, he was quite good. Now, as a restricted free agent, the Bulls got to make a decision with him, who they got across in that Tony Snell trade. And I cannot believe at this point that Tony Snell turned out to be a better player, considering how poor he was in Chicago. Maybe it's just Chicago. Who knows? Maybe it's the Bulls. Carter-Williams, do they bring him back? I don't think they'll have really high hopes for that. When Rondo was out at the end of the year in those playoffs, they went with Isaiah Cannon over him, which is horrible. They've just got this bunch of point guards, Grant, Payne, there as well as Rondo. I just don't see Carter-Williams being brought back on this team. They had limited faith in him. He only played half the games. He did have a knee injury to start the year. I just don't see it happening. And he's one of those guys that will be a fantasy option if for some reason he plays 30 minutes a game, because he will get assists, he will get rebounds, he will get steals, he will block some shots, and he will score a little bit. And he can be a really good fantasy option. It's just never going to happen because he's just not good enough on the court to demand those minutes. And he's going to be, I guess, put into that area with players like Tony Roten, guys like that, who when they play, the stats come, but in honesty, they're horrible and they can't sustain the minutes on the court. And I think that's where we're at with Michael Carter-Williams. In terms of his advanced numbers, they weren't ideal. A PER of 9.9. His true shooting was horrible. Really piss poor win shares. Offensive box score plus minus of negative 4.1 is horrendous, but led the team in defensive box score plus minus. And the team was even with him in his on-off. He was 0.2, so bang on there. He doesn't have very much upside for dynasty. Let's talk Jaren Grant, the other point guard, who I was really impressed with at times this year. He played 63 games this season after he came across in the Derrick Rose trade, started 28 of them, and I thought handled himself pretty well. He had some weird stretches. He had a game, I think his first start against Portland, where he went off, and then he was limited, extremely limited down the stretch. Or not down the stretch after that game, like he barely touched it. And then towards the end of the year, he started a whole bunch of games throughout January where he looked solid. But then a couple of other ones in April where he looked even better. He had a string of 3 straight starts in April: 15-8-5, 15-3-5, 17-1-11. And that was the moment where I went, all right, maybe there's something here with Grant. After that, he went back to the bench and went back to obscurity completely. And again, Hoiberg this is his stretch of games. All right, so he started 15-8-5 in 31 minutes, 15-3-5 in 30, 17-1-11 in 28 minutes. That's all good. Then he moves back to the bench and plays 22 minutes and goes 5-6-2. Then 21 minutes, 6-2-4. Then 6 minutes for a 6 trillion. Then 15 minutes for 6 points. Then 5 minutes for 1 assist. And then a DNP CD. And then 5 minutes in the last game. So just completely up and down with everything that he did. For the year, 16 minutes a game, 5.5 points, 1.7 rebounds, 1.8 assists, 0.7 steals, 41, 89, and 35 for a true shooting of 54%. The thing that I look at there the most is the steals at 0.7 is impressive. The assists at 1.8 isn't great, and that translates to just 4.2 per 36. But in the last couple of months of the season, when he did look to be improving, he averaged 6.4 assists per 36, which is an improvement. But overall, he did struggle at times with those assists, playing alongside Butler, playing alongside Wade. But in that stretch where he was able to play when Wade wasn't there, he was able to get some extra assists and looked a little bit better. So I'm not fully out on Jaren Grant. He's not young, even though he's a second year player. He's 24 years of age. I think that he should be. And again, another thing that I just hated the way that Hoiberg used these point guards, continually rotated them. I thought that at times he was the best point guard for majority of this season. He was the best point guard on this team, better than Rondo, better than Carter Williams, better than Payne. But whether they think of him as being any sort of player for the future, I'm not sure. I think he's probably just going to be a backup. He was the 250th ranked player this season, and I can see him being a top 200 guy a couple of times in his year, but I really don't think that he is going to become an upper level starter. At this point, he's got a fair way to go. Now, the team was 2.7 points per 100 possessions better off with him on the court, so that's a win. That's a good sign for a guy like that, especially when Rondo was a negative 4.4 and Wade was a negative 4.8. It shows that some of these guys, running Grant with Butler and Mirotic was the numbers that actually got the Chicago Bulls moving in the right direction. And as I said, post All-Star, he averaged 2.8 assists in his 16 minutes and shot 48 from the field and 41 from 3. So some really positive numbers. But once more, just totally dicked around in the rotation with his changing role, when really what he did never deserved for him to actually lose that role. And that's, I guess, part of the confusion that he would be suffering under a numbnuts coach like Hoiberg. Let's move on to Bob Portis, a player who has an inordinate amount of hype behind him. For what reason, I have absolutely no idea. He has proven to be bad so far in his first 2 years. Not saying he can't get better, because he can, but he has been bad. 64 games, 16 minutes, 7 points, half a three, 4.5 rebounds, and just absolutely putrid defensive numbers. 0.3 steals, 0.2 blocks, shot 49 from the field, 66 from the line, and 33 from 3. We remember he had a couple of games in the playoffs where he was able to put together some big performances. He had a couple of games down the stretch after Gibson went that he put together some big performances, but they come on these fluky shooting nights. Like he had like a 12-11 game on 75% shooting. He had a 21-11 game on 60% shooting. He had 19-9 on 80% shooting. This is what happens with Portis. He's extremely streaky with his shooting, and Hoiberg says, all right, you're hitting your shots. You need to play more minutes now. And then he can put up some stats. And he can put up stats for fantasy. There's no denying that. What I can deny is he's ever going to be a good defensive player, because he is absolutely horrific at that end of the court. And that's a real problem for a guy that's playing at the 4 to be as bad as what he is defensively. That is a real concern. For a big man to be a negative 1.5 in defensive box score plus minus, it should be a real alarm bell sort of thing for this team. Now, the Bulls might say, we don't want to pay Mirotic, we'll move on from him, we'll start Portis. And Portis will score, but he jacks up shots at such a huge rate. He's not efficient. He's not efficient in general. He's a 55 true shooting, which is about average, but it's not super efficient. He jacks up shots. He can be an energy rebounder, but he provides no defense. He won't do anything playmaking-wise or assist-wise or anything like that. So he does have his limits as a fantasy guy. I don't believe that he will ever become a solid 30-minute-a-game starter because I just have so many concerns with his offensive decision-making and his defense in general. And that can get better, but what we've seen from him in 2 years, the fundamentals of him defensively, there's a long way to go for Bobby Portis. He has a real chance, though, to sneak inside the top 150 next year. I'm not saying that that's impossible, because if Mirotic goes and they decide to go with him, he could average 16 and 9. And that might be enough. The problem is it will probably come on 46% and 70 from the line and half a block and 0.4 steals and just really piss poor numbers there that will limit his ability to play or to be a higher ranked player. And comparing him and Mirotic from a fantasy point of view, it's a no contest. Per 36 minutes, Mirotic 131st, Portis 313th. And that's how their fantasy stat set plays out, is that Mirotic is by far the better fantasy guy, and he's by far the better real life player. And Portis doesn't just move in and translate there. Portis was in fact a team worst, minus 6.7, if you don't include Cameron Payne and Isaiah Cannon, who played so few minutes. As a regular rotation player, he was the worst player on this team from the on-off numbers as a negative 6.7. And again, for some reason, people just really, really love him, especially in the fantasy community, and I'm not there. I want him to be good. I'm a Bulls fan. I really do want him to become good. I just have pretty significant doubts. He heads into his all-important third season now, so this could be an opportunity for him to break out, but the lack of defensive ability and defensive stats does ever limit him from becoming an upper echelon top-class fantasy guy, and that's something I think that you should always pay attention to. Chris Felicio played 66 games, 16 minutes a game, 5 points, 5 boards, half a steal, 0.3 blocks, 58 and 65 for a true shooting of 60%. Felicio is limited. We know what he can and can't do, and the answer to that is he can rebound. He can get offensive putbacks. He can score close to the basket on those putbacks, and he can finish efficiently. That's what he can do. What can't he do? Well, he can't provide a huge amount defensively. In terms of defensive stats, as a defender, he's a very good defender for this team. A really, really solid guy as a defensive player, but it doesn't translate into defensive numbers. But he is efficient, and he contributes to winning basketball a lot of the time. Now, he was a negative 1.8, which is not awesome, but he is a guy that has some positive defensive box score, plus minus, and showed enough to me that he's going to maybe even approach 10 million a year. Maybe that's a little high. Maybe it's going to be 6 or 7, but I can see that happening with Felicio getting that role. And if I had to choose between paying Felicio 10 million or Bismack Biyombo 18 million, there's no debate about that. It's quite comfortably Felicio. I think that he is that level of player. He's not that level of defender, but he can be a player that's as useful as, say, a Bismack Biyombo or a Tim Mozgov. I'd rather have Felicio than Mozgov as well. He's 24 years of age. He's got a little bit of room to grow, but he's never going to become a successful player. In fact, when you look at guys, you could look at Robin Lopez as being maybe a fantasy model for who he's going to be. A low-scoring, high-rebounding, or actually he's a better rebounder than Lopez, but decent efficiency type of player who is limited in numerous other areas, including his shot blocking is never going to be elite. That's the sort of level I think you should be looking at Felicio. So watch to see where he goes in free agency. There is a chance that he gets a spike in his rankings, in his fantasy stats for this season. There is a chance of that, and I think that he can be a decent player. Denzel Valentine. It wasn't a great year. 57 games, 17 minutes, 5 points, 2.6 rebounds, 1 assist, 1.3 threes, half a steal, 35% shooting is disgusting, 78 from the line and 35 from 3 for a true shooting of 49%. I really disliked Hoiberg's reluctance to use him. The problems with Valentine are the lack of athleticism, the knee problems that surfaced before the draft, or just before the draft, and then, of course, the ankle injury, which was a pretty severe ankle sprain. He's gone in for surgery on that ankle to have that cleaned up after the year. But the fact that he wasn't able to get any playing time, and I would have just loved to seen him as a guy that can shoot threes, playing alongside Butler, with Butler as the primary point guard, and having him as a guy that's a secondary ball handler, because he can do that, and being that sort of player. Now, coming into last season, his college stats translated super well for fantasy. And when I do all my draft stuff and look at translating the college stats, we do it on a team-independent basis per 36. Like, he was like a top 4 or top 5 guy in translating that before they come to the league. But when they come to the league, team situation is so important. And him coming to a situation where he's not going to be able to run as a secondary ball handler because Butler's there, because Wade's there, because Rondo's there, and then they traded for Michael Carter-Williams, they weren't going to use him in a ball handling role, and that really did decrease his fantasy ability and his fantasy upside. He had a couple of decent performances this year. He had this stretch in March when Wade was out where he scored double digits in 5 straight games and hit at least 2 threes in all of those games. In fact, he hit 3 threes in 4 of the 5 games. But he's still not being used in his optimal role, and that's the role I think that was highlighted when they played against the Suns. He played 34 minutes and had 15, 5, and 5 with 5 threes and 3 steals. I'm not out on Valentine. I think that this is a bad team for him to be on because of the other players around, Rondo, Wade, Butler especially. It's not playing to what his strengths are. He is always going to struggle defensively, and he's probably more of a point guard than anything because of his ball handling ability and his vision. And he can shoot. Like, he didn't shoot well from 2 this year, or overall field goal percentage at 35 is bad. But 35 from 3, that's okay. He can be a decent shooter. He can be a 38% shooter at some point in his career. And he can be a guy that averages 3.5 to 4 assists and the same amount of rebounds. So I'm not out on Valentine. It is going to depend on a lot of situational change. Wade to go, Rondo to go, and for him to, or even to Butler to go. So if I can get him for extremely cheap in a dynasty, I would, but his value, there are a lot of red flags. The injuries, the athleticism, and the team that he's currently playing on are not good signs for Denzel. But I'm definitely not out on him. The team was 1.1 points per 100 possessions worse off with him on the court, so it's not a big drop-off. And he showed me enough at times that if he can be healthy and placed in the right environment, that he can be a fantasy useful guy and be a useful NBA rotation player. How about Paulie Zipser? Zipsanity. I was pretty excited about Zipser heading into the draft. I thought that he should go at the end of the first round. He slid to the Bulls all the way to pick 46, which I was real happy with. He ended up playing 44 games in 19 minutes a game, which I don't think many people would have anticipated. In fact, there was plenty of people when Zipser was starting, they go, who's this guy? Because they don't follow the NBA maybe as closely as what I did. He played 18 games, and I thought he was a real winner for this team to get him as late in the draft as they did. So I criticised Foreman and Paxson quite a lot, but this was a real winning selection. I was pretty happy with it. He was a plus 1.6 with his on-off numbers, but his numbers don't translate that well to fantasy. 19 minutes a game, 5.5 points, 0.8 threes, 3 boards, less than an assist, 0.3 steals and 0.4 blocks. Shot 40%, 78 from the line, and 33% from 3. So, thoroughly below average numbers with his efficiency. None of his counting stats look great. I like what Zipser can do. I like him as a player that can go out there on the court and do winning things and fill in at the 4, play at the 3, grab some rebounds, have some decent performances. But for him to ever be a consistent top 150 player, a lot of things would have to change, and I don't ever see that happening for Paulie. He was the 327th ranked player this year. I think he can probably jump up to be a top 250 guy next year, but the 19 minutes he played a game this season is probably pushing it in terms of where he can go. So maybe that top 250 is a little bit of a stretch for him next season, because can he actually play more minutes than that? And where does he improve? Well, one thing he'll improve on is his efficiency. And I think he does need to improve his defensive work as well. But the thing I will mention about Zipser is, much like Valentine, he is a good passer. And when he played over in Germany as a secondary ball handler wing type, much like Timothé Luwawu-Cabarrot did over there, and the way Valentine played at Michigan State, he can pass. He can get assists. But the way that he was played, instead of as a 2-3, he was played as a 3-4, as a makeshift power forward at times, and then filled in for Dwayne Wade, but a guy that just goes stand in the corner, Paul. That impacted his ability to get those assists at 0.8. So I don't look at 0.8 assists and say this guy can't pass, or this guy can't develop, or this guy can't play make. That's the area where I think he can improve, because we've seen it before, but it is partly to do with who he's playing with. So it would be a longer term investment when the Bulls clear these guys out, that a Zipser-Valentine combination, they could start to develop their assist numbers and get them way up there, because they were two guys who were high assist rate sort of players for their positions and combined to average 1.9 assists for the year in 36 minutes combined. And that's just nowhere near enough. But it is a massive, massive function of the team that they played on and the environment that they were in. So don't discount Paulie Zipser. I still think Valentine has the much higher ceiling, especially from fantasy. But Zipser showed that he can be a solid 8th or 9th man easily for a decent team, a player who does what he needs to do and is really solid at doing it. And I think he's going to have a pretty strong or pretty decent NBA career, which is probably the worst sort of praise that I can give someone. But he's going to be decent, and he's going to be able to be that guy that can consistently get a role without putting up big numbers. But just watch the assists. I think there is some level that they can get better than this, and that can help him. But for him to ever be a top 150 guy, I think that's probably a stretch to go that far. Joffrey Laverne. Look, 20 games he played for the Bulls. He came across from the Thunder in the Taj Gibson trade. He wasn't awesome in that time. 12 minutes, 4.5 points, 3.5 rebounds. 41% from a center is horrible from the field, 60 from the line, and 30% from three for a true shooting of 46. He's a restricted free agent. He is really bad. I don't see him getting retained by the Bulls. I don't see him being an impactful player anywhere. I had some okay hopes for Laverne when he came across from France, but he has struggled pretty mightily in his time in the NBA, and I don't think there's really a huge amount to be gained from looking at him in a huge amount of detail. Just a guy that does struggle quite a bit. Isaiah Cannon, the Cannonball, 39 games, 15 minutes a game, 4.5 points, 0.6 threes, 1.3 rebounds, and of course, very little else. 36 from the field and 27% from three. This is the guy that the Bulls signed to be their three-point shooter, and he shot 27% from three. He is not a good three-point shooter. He is a willing three-point shooter. He is not a good three-point shooter, despite what the reputation might have you believe. Yes, he did start games in the playoffs. Yes, it remains one of the more ridiculous decisions that teams have made in recent NBA memory. It's not that he was bad, and he did guard Isaiah Thomas pretty well, but he is not a good player. He was not a good player in Philadelphia. He was a player in Philadelphia who, when the minutes came, he was able to provide those three-pointers for you, but he cannot pass. He's not a good three-point shooter at all. Although, to be fair, the last two seasons in Philly, he shot 37 and 36, which is fine, which is above average, but it's not great. It's not, when you're banking your name on being a three-point shooter, you've got to be Anthony Morrow, who hits 41% of his threes. You can't be the guy that shoots marginally above average, which is what Cannon did now. In saying that, Morrow shot 31% from three this year, but back in his heyday, in his prime, he was the guy shooting 45% from three. And that's just not who Cannon is. I don't think the Bulls should be really looking to guarantee his deal, especially with Payne and Grant and Rondo, who are going to be on the roster. What's the point of bringing back a fourth point guard who's not good? There's not much to see with him. Same with Anthony Morrow, who wasn't awesome for this team, but in true Fred Hoiberg style, he was able to put him in confusing situations. He played only 10 minutes a game, but shot 43% from three when he was in Chicago for a true shooting of 61. He is just, if for some reason he's forced into a bigger role, you stream him for threes, and that's it. But everything else about his game is bad, and that's what limits his playing time, and it's consistently limited his playing time throughout his career. The last player, Cameron Payne, a guy that I did have fairly high hopes for, but looked absolutely horrible in Chicago, but I'm not out on him just yet. I think that I know that if he is to be placed into, say, a Dennis Schroeder situation, where he was atrocious for his first season, Schroeder, and a little bit better his second year, and started to get better, and put up close to top 50 numbers in his first season as a starter. And that's what I think Cameron Payne can become, if he ever gets that opportunity. Now, the Bulls obviously put some high hopes in him, trading Gibson away, and he was the prize piece that came back. But he couldn't even get into the playoffs even when Rondo was out, which is disappointing. He played only 11 games in his Bulls career, 13 minutes, 5 points, 1.5 rebounds, 1.5 assists, half a steal, 33% from the field, a disgusting 25% from the line, and 32% from three. But again, I am not out on Cameron Payne. Yes, his PER of 4 is bad. His true shooting of 42 is horrendous. Negative win shares, negative 7.5 box score plus minus. This is bordering on RJ Hunter territory, but he played only 140 minutes in Chicago and was battling some injuries. And I think that the broken foot problem really did limit him. He looked great in the offseason before that. And I am still on board and this is as low point as Payne's value can get. If you can get him for super cheap in a deep 200-man plus dynasty, I would do it. I don't think he is starting next season. I think that Rondo comes back. I would hope that he can push into that backup role and play 20 minutes a game, but maybe that's still Grant. But Payne has very high fantasy upside, and I do think that he can become a player. And my faith in that is fading, definitely, but I do think that he can become a player. So he is still a guy that I have hopes for, and I don't think that this 12-game sample in Chicago is indicative of or 11-game sample is indicative of what we can expect from him moving forward. He did pretty much nothing in his time for the Bulls, only reached double-figure scoring twice. He had a 14-point game with 4 triples against Detroit in March, and then in 16 minutes against the Rockets in March, had 11 points with 2 triples. But he can be a fantasy contributor. So if you're in a situation where you can stash a guy, you've got roster space, you can get him for nothing. I do think that it's a couple of years away, probably looking at 2018-19 for Payne, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him make a Dennis Schroeder type of leap. So I'm not out on him just yet. All right, let's wrap this up before this Game 2 starts. We'll get into some questions. Danny says, campaign. He says, I too see the potential. How much did injury destroy his year? I think it was a massive factor in his year. And does your outlook change much? Rondo help or hinder? Rondo obviously hinders his stats for this season, but I do think that Rondo helps him because Rondo has been working with these young players quite a bit. So I'm okay with that. But yeah, as I said, just 30 seconds ago, I think we're probably a year away from Payne actually getting close to being a contributor. Jordan says, what has to happen for you to stop being a Bulls fan? Nothing. I won't ever stop being a Bulls fan, but as I move more into this NBA media and coverage stuff, I'm more just a fan of the league, and I cover the league and I cover the league in general. And my level of Bulls fandom is not the same as, say, for you guys living here in Australia. It's nowhere near the level of my Western Bulldogs fandom when we won the premiership last season. I was there in the stands crying. If the Bulls won the title, I wouldn't be sitting at home crying. As you get into covering more of the league, your fandom does decrease, but I will never stop saying that the Bulls are my team. I just don't give up on teams or pick up new teams. I'm just more like, I just want to cover the league, and the Bulls are more just like a self-sabotage thing where I watch them and just see my blood boil. Iron Man, who is the better fantasy player, Jimmy Butler or Paul George for redraft and dynasty? It's a good question. You're splitting hairs though. They're so close. I would probably take George marginally ahead of Butler. Marginally. But they're so close. But I think if I had to take one, it would be George. Rajon Johnson, I think I pronounced that correctly, was moving Derrick Rose an upgrade or a downgrade this season? I think it's just a grade. They were the same. I think what they did in moving Rose, getting Lopez to come across, getting maybe something with Grant was probably a good deal. They obviously didn't improve their future. They got Lopez on a cheap deal for a couple more years. And they also don't now have to deal with the issues of signing Rose in free agency. And I think that's part of it as well, is that they didn't want to have to deal, and that's gutless on their part, but they didn't want to have to deal with feedback of letting go this local legend, this team, former MVP, this team guy that so many people, and there are certain players in the league, Rose and Rondo are probably the two of them, that have these people that are just absolutely obsessed with them, and you say anything bad about them and they just get straight onto you and they believe that they're still living in the glory days of 2008 or 2010. And the front office didn't want to deal with that decision of, what do we pay him? Do we just let him walk for nothing? They can leave that be someone else's problem now. So in terms of that, I think it was an upgrade. But overall, their performance, they're just bang on, straight on where they were last year, I think. Where are we? Kyle Norb. Which of the Bulls' young guys seems more likely to have a top 70-point season at some point in their career? It's a good question. I guess we're looking at Valentine, Portis, and Payne as the three young guys there. More likely. Payne, to me, is the best of that group. from a pure fantasy perspective, in terms of if they all played the same minutes, I could see Payne would be the more higher ranked of those guys. Who's more likely to have it? It's probably going to be Portis, just given the fact that he's more likely to get the minutes over Valentine and Payne at this point. But in terms of overall fantasy ability, Payne is the number one guy there, I think. Kyle Norb says, thanks for the heads up on Zipser last year. Where does he go from here? As I touched on before, I think he just slots into that eighth man sort of a role and improves some of his assist rate stuff and can become a decent contributor. James C. is campaign getting meaningful minutes next season. I hope so. I hope that he can move, get rid of Cannon and Carter Williams. They'll be gone, and move Payne into that backup role ahead of Grant. But as I said, I was impressed with Grant as well. So I'm not banking on much from Payne next season. Greg Gould. My question is, why state you're trying to get younger and more athletic and then sign Rondo and Wade? I'll tell you why, because they have no idea what they're doing. They are as inept a front office organization, shout out to Sacramento, as it is in the NBA. They have no ability to self-criticize, to accept blame, to admit mistakes and move on. They've got no clear plan of what they are doing, and it extends down from the front office to the coaching staff. They are a nightmare, they are a mess, and they literally have no idea what they're doing and saying things. And some of their drafting is fine. The Jimmy Butler pick was great. The Paul Zipser pick was great, but they just make dumb decision after dumb decision, and they have no accountability, and it is completely infuriating. Juan Manuel says, with playing time, do you see Rondo as a top 50 potential player? Not really. Yes, he can get there, but he needs those assists. And playing alongside Butler and Wade, he's not going to be an 11-assist game guy, maybe a 7-assist game guy, and then those percentages really do cut him down. So I wouldn't be valuing him as a top 50 guy. To wrap it up, Stavros Basaraka says, surely this is the longest pod. Don't know, we're at an hour and 6 minutes, so I guess we're pretty close to the longest pod. I could have gone on for ages, but I will save your ears. We are done because we are getting real close to the NBA Game 2 of the finals kicking off after the Warriors absolutely kicked the Cavs' ass. You'll probably listen to this after the finals. I predict another Warriors smashing here in Game 2. Could be wrong. I predict them to smash them once more. All right, don't forget to check out our sponsor, SeatGeek, and use the promo code LOFantasy to get yourself a $20 rebate, and subscribe to this podcast. It's the best way that you can keep up to date with all the shows and make sure you're listening to all of the Season in Review podcasts. We are done here, guys. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Gar Foreman.